as something on my brain, on my mind that I've been wanting to say. Um, as the title says, traditional men, the power of a traditional man, and your right to rule your kingdom and rule and define your kingdom and how it's supposed to be ran. Right. Um, I don't know. This was just swimming around in my head today. I don't know why I'm thinking about saying it, but I gotta say it. It's been on my chest. Right. Oh damn! We in New York City, so it's like supposed to be 100 degrees today. So I'm outside. Um, me personally, I don't mind the heat because I'm used to training in the heat and stuff. Still a martial artist, so a lot of my conditioning back in the day in my 20s and still to this day was in heat like this, right? So put it like this, right? And this is not going to be a long clip, maybe 30 to 50 minutes, maybe 30 minutes to an hour. Put it like this: traditional men. Well, let's talk about America or North America, right? North America, the foundation of the America we benefit from today is those traditional norms or traditionalism. What's part of traditionalism? Monogamy or monogamous relationships. Those relationships or monogamous relationships is what has been the successful structure that has built America into what it is today, right? Because you have a family structure, a nuclear family, ran by a patriarchal or ran by a patriarchal man, and a man that went through those three processes of the three P's of manhood and masculinity, right? That being protection, provision, and procreation, and the biggest P, which is patriarchy, right? And a lot of people today, like you see this on YouTube, right? Where you have, and it's my biggest gripe about a lot of these men in these spaces, especially the men that are not traditional or non-traditional, right? See, the non-traditional men, I view them as the serpent in the garden that influenced Eve to rebel against God and her husband. Because remember, you can look at the Garden of Eden like a traditional relationship, or traditionalism, or a traditional America, right? And you can say because a lot of how America is built off of God and traditional, but based on Christian Bible, right? So you can look at America and how it's built like the Garden of Eden. And God told Adam and Eve not to bite this apple. Say the apple is non-monogamy or polygamy or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And God told Adam and Eve, hey, this garden is monogamous. Do not bite from the tree of polygamy. Do not bite from um, the tree of hedonism. Do not bite from the tree of three or fourism. Do not bite from this tree right here, right? And the serpent in the garden now comes in and it tells Eve, hey, Eve, you know, you should eat that apple. You should go ahead and bite that apple of non-traditionalism. You should go ahead and bite that apple. And at first, Eve tells the serpent, hey, listen, God told me not to eat this apple because if I eat this apple, I shall surely die. Right? And there's a quote, and I forgot the quote, but it goes something like this, that if, I'm not going to repeat the quote because I don't want to butcher the quote, but basically, it's saying that when you disrupt a society that's foundation is built off of, hey, what's going on, guys? What? Okay, I'm about to block you guys because that's not what I'm talking about. Hold on. Remove. See, I don't like trolls coming into my thing. All right. I don't like trolls coming into my stuff, disrupting my thing. I don't know what any of the fuck that means. All right. So, pardon you guys. All right. So, when you come into my channel, respect my fucking house. This is my problem with men. All right. I don't care if you dislike the channel. I don't care if you leave. When you come into my house, you're on the channel, talk about the fucking topic. Nothing else. I don't know what any of that troll shit y'all talking about in there mean. All right, let's go. So, what's going on, Logan? Now, I'm not talking about you, bro. Look at the comics that was scrolled up above you that I have to block and remove. All right? So, come to the channel, click the like, share, respect the platform. So, you got to teach black men about masculinity, right? Part of masculinity is which is traditionalism. You respect people's house. You respect another man's house. You respect his rules. See what I'm saying? That's what a lot of black men have to get into their brains, into their psychology. Well, thank you for that. Well, speak about the topic now, please. All right. My name is Kish, not Kishar with the A. All right. So shout out to y'all. Right. So let's get back to what I'm talking about. Right. So when you have America, it's just like the Garden of Eden, and you have God telling us, Adam and Eve to be monogamous and don't bite from this tree of non-monogamy or hedonism. And the serpent comes into the garden and tells Eve to go bite that apple, right? And she go bites the apple, and you know how the story goes in the Garden of Eden is that when you bite from this apple, you shall surely die. No problem, no problem, right? So now that's what I see a lot of men on YouTube that are non-traditional, is that they're influencing the women to rebel against the traditional man's house. And then now when the traditional men come out now and start to check the women and to check other men that are disrupting the house, those non-traditional men have the nerve, just like how you saw those guys come into my comment section earlier and disrespect me by posting shit in the comment section that had nothing to do with the topic, right? That's what they do. And if you're a traditional man, and if you're a black man, remember, you fought as a black man. Your ancestors fought for you to vote. Your ancestors have engaged in every war with this country to fight other countries that was engaging in communism. And you fought to uphold tradition and capitalism, right? So black men, you're every part of this traditional American space because you contributed to it. You fought for it. You died for it. You bled for it. You helped to shape the space, right? So that's what I see a lot of that. Because my issue, because see with the women on that you see on YouTube or even in real life, right, that are 304s, what they're complaining about is they're not being able to get access to a traditional man and to a traditional relationship. The traditional men are saying, well, you're a 304. You don't qualify to gain access to a relationship. And what used to happen now, right, especially in the black community, is that the women would shame black men into accepting 304s or to accepting bad behaving women. And the reason for that was because a lot of black men were raised by a single mother. And for in the black culture and black community, black women dictated what a real man was to a black boy, to a black man. Right? So black women were able to say, well, real man should do this, or a real man should do that, or a real man should do A, B, C, and D. And black men, because the black community has never been a patriarchy in general or as a whole. It's only been a patriarchy as far as the individual man themselves, right? So, you know, because every time black men try to establish a patriarchal footing in America, like a Black Wall Street, like a Roosevelt, Florida, et cetera, it always got crushed or shut down by other men, right? So, because of during the 80s and the 90s with the epidemic of a single mother household, a lot of black men, their masculinity was defined by black women, right? And because of that now, so today, right, black men are now free to be more traditional. Because back during the 80s and the 90s and the 60s and Jim Crow, Black men cannot be those two primary P's, which is a provider and a protector and a patriarch in his household. Because remember, during slavery, during Jim Crow, during the 80s and the 90s, that threat of racism was constantly attacking black men, right? So now in this day and age, in this space, black men can engage in capitalism. They can engage in, hold on, let the plane pass by. It is hot as fuck out here in New York, but as I said again, I'm used to it, right? But since black men are able to engage in capitalism and engage into the primary P, which is patriarchal now, and be actually traditional, black men are saying, okay, cool, are trying to set some rules and guidelines in the community. The problem with black culture now, right, is that there is a lot of player pimp, Macism, 304 isms, schisms in the black culture. So now if you're a black man and you're trying to be more traditional and more patriarchal, now remember, traditional men, since the Victorian age, and black men were around during the Victorian age, the rules have always been that if I'm a gentleman and I'm a traditional, only a lady, or I'm a traditional man, only a lady gains access to a monogamous relationship with me. If you were 304 or you were a brothel worker, you didn't get access to a traditional man or a traditional relationship, right? Because you got to remember, during the Victorian age, there was always a 304. There were always sex workers. There was always that. Even before the Victorian age, if you go back to the medieval times, if you go back to Rome, if you go back to Europe, there were always, sex workers. There were always 304s. It's just that the men set a standard. The men said, okay, cool, because you got to remember, you cannot change a 304 into being a housewife. You cannot make a 304 into a lady and vice versa. You cannot make a lady into a 304. Why is that? Because a lady who is a lady is always going to be a lady. A 304 is always going to be a 304. That's who they are. Now, all it takes is now for a lady now who wants to be a lady, she just needs to find a man that's a gentleman. A 304, she got to find a man that's into being in the 304s, right? So the men during the Victorian age, because you got to remember, the Victorian age was a refinement of both masculinity and femininity. Before that, everything was more barbaric. You go back to the Vikings, you can even watch the Game of Thrones. The Game of Thrones give you a somewhat of an idea of what took place in Europe, even in Africa, right? Because they were barbaric. Africa was barbaric too. Go do your research, right? So when you come to even in Asia, like with the Chinese and the Japanese and the Koreans, they were barbaric as well. They were fighting each other. It was rough time for them. Go look up Genghis Khan. Go look up Attila the Hun, right? Go look up a lot of those warlords of those times in that era and see what went down in those times, right? So when you got to the Victorian age, that's where masculinity and femininity got more refined. That's where you had the gentleman standard and the lady standard, right? And during the Victorian age, those men who were traditional, they set the standards, and the men set a standard and said, listen, we're not going to stop you from being who you are. But if you want access to a traditional relationship or to a more traditional man, you have to be a lady, right? And guess what? That applied to every sector and class of the Victorian age, whether you were middle class, high class, working class, or lower class, right? Working class or middle class being like, say in our time, that maybe be like 60 to 80K. Working class maybe be around maybe 30 to 50K or 40K in our time, right? But that standard applied all across the board, right? So the traditional rule that the men set in the house has always been especially in dating and mating, is if you're 304, you work at the brothel, you don't get a gentleman. You don't get a traditional relationship. But if you're a lady now, then you get those stuff. That has always been those have always been the rules. So when you jump it up to the modern day today, and you look at YouTube and you look at like the Fresh and Fits, the whatever podcast is, a lot of these 304s that are online, complaining about them not being able to get access to a traditional man, and even the women in general, right, that bit into feminism, right? And what feminism has done to the women is that they decided to go on this 3 or 4 phase, go on this. We're gonna rebel against the patriarchy by giving our box out freely to everybody, right? So what's happening now is that those women, they're complaining about the men today not giving them access to a relationship with them. They're not realizing that, okay, well, you're a 3 or 4. You are you lived your life as a 3 or 4. You lived your life as a prostitution or prostitute. You lived your life as a sex worker. So guess what? You don't gain access to a traditional guy, right? And what used to happen, even in real life and even on YouTube, is that the women would shame the men. Now, earlier I talked about how a black woman would shame black men into accepting bad behaving black women or a 3 or 4 or whatever. Well, it's the same thing in everywhere else in society, right? Where the women will shame the men and say, well, you're not a real man, or you're insecure because you want to accept me into your life. Now, the idea behind being insecure is that you as yourself, you're not confident in the value with you, or you're not confident with you. Now, me being confident with myself and what I want out of life doesn't make me insecure, because I know what I want and I know what I don't want, right? So what the women used to do is they would used to manipulate a man's masculinity and tell that man, well, you're insecure for not accepting a 3 or 4, or you're not accepting of a basically a chick that's non-traditional, right? And for a time, the shaming tactics would work. It would work in the dating market. It would work on men who were not raised with with any masculine principles. Because not even just the black community, and a lot of other communities, right? Maybe with the Asians, they might not be bothered by this, but especially in the black and the white communities, where a lot of the males have been raised by single mothers or whatever, those men don't have those masculine traditional codes or traditional reference points, right? And then the thing too, with the bloomers like Steve Harvey, where they failed, right? A lot of bloomers like Steve Harvey, they were traditional in the sense of they would protect, provide, and they would grind and work, but they lacked the patriarchal point of that. And a lot of those bloomers, what they would do is they would wife up 3 or 4s. They would go to a club and see a stripper. Y'all know the old stories. Like a lot of them bloomer men would go to a strip club, right, and try to save a 3 or 4. So you got a lot of bloomer men that did that stuff, that allowed a woman that did not qualify to gain access to a traditional man. So a lot of the bloomers, they cultivated a lot of crap that we're dealing with now, right? So what happened is women who are non-traditional were trying to shame the men to accept non-traditional women, or they were trying to shame traditional men to accept the non-traditional women. Right, so how they did it was they tried to say that traditional masculinity was toxic. They would just make that sweeping in general brush. You know, that traditional masculinity is toxic because traditional men, they define the roles of the women and they define the roles of the men. Well, if I'm a king of my house, right, and this is how I run my empire, say I'm a boss or employee of a company, I'm a boss. Because I'm a boss, I get to define how I want to run my company. I get to define. I live by JFK Airport, so, right? Oh shit! Don't turn off. Yo, my phone is getting so hot that it's about to turn off and shit. So I gotta get somewhere cool. But, so if I'm a boss, right? Say I own Shake Shack restaurant, or I'm a manager at Shake Shack, right? I get to define how I want to run my establishment, and I get to define the roles of my employees. If my employees don't like the role that I define for them, they don't get to call me insecure and tell me what to do. They can leave or go find employment somewhere else, right? So that's what's been going on, right? And what the women have been doing with feminism and et cetera, and the help of other men. See what I'm saying? With the help of other men, the women have been shaming a lot of traditional men to accept non-traditional women by calling you insecure, by saying you're not a real man, taking stabs at your masculinity, and trying to dictate and define to a man how to operate. Do not turn off. Shit, I gotta go. Yo, it's so hot out here. And maybe because as a martial artist, how I used to train in extensive heat, extreme heat. So I don't feel the heat, but my phone feel the heat. Anyway, let's see if I go somewhere cooler and shit. So I'm gonna go into my room and shit. Yeah, because if I don't go into a cooler place, my phone gonna shut off. Damn. Y'all gonna have to see a close up of my beard and shit. Hold on, one second. All right. Hopefully I'm in a cooler place now. Don't turn off, fool. Hopefully I'm in a cooler place now, so I could. Yo, I'm sweating. But yeah, what was I saying? Okay, so it's cool. My phone is cooling down now. This gave me a notification. So, okay, I'm not on mute. So, what was I talking about? Shaming tactics. So, a lot of the women would try to shame the men because a lot of men in society, like the black community, they were more, let's say, gynocentric or matriarchal, right? Or matriarchal in their thinking. So a woman, especially in the black community, was able to tell a black man, "You're not a real man if you don't do this. You ain't a real man if you don't do that. You're insecure if you don't accept this." And because a lot of men in the black community never had that masculine man training to know how to deal with that, they would accept a 3 or 4, or they would program or socialize to accept that type of woman. That's why you see a lot of black men in relationships with a lot of 3 or 4s, right? Because in the black community, it's a lot of player mat game being taught to black men, right? So it's not really traditional masculinity. It's really player mat game, right? Even though player mat game, there's masculinity in that too, right? But with traditional masculinity, it's masculinity with more traditional rules centered around it, right? A player, it's masculinity too, but it's more player concepts and rules and ideology around that, right? But at the center of both a player I should get into that too, right? But anyway, because you had most of society, the men and their masculinity being defined by women, which is funny because a lot of women today complain about traditional masculinity being toxic because men are defining what the roles of men and women are, when the women have been defining what the role of a man has been, which is funny to me. That's the biggest gaslight or hypocrisy I've ever seen. So now, when you go on YouTube now, right, you see the non-traditional women complaining about the traditional men not accepting them into a relationship, and the non-traditional women using manipulation tactics to manipulate the men. You're insecure, you're not a real man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For a time, it was working. And then what happened was you had the Black Manosphere coming out. And you had a lot of black men like the Angry Man, Tommy Sotomayor, Anton Daniels. You had a lot of those brothers coming out and trying to that had experience of what masculinity is, and expose the shaming tactics and the manipulation tactics to especially black men in the black community and to the rest of the population, right? So what happened was the women didn't know what to do. Because now if you were a female and you were living the lifestyle of a 3 or 4, and the game that you were being told by your 3 or 4 mommy or your mammy or a lot of 304s and hoes, because what happened was a lot of women took game from 304s. The game that the 304s gave to the regular women was that, yo, go out there, be a 304 hot girl summer, 304 phase, and then find your traditional man that's gonna forgive you for your past or don't know about your past life, right? And that's how they would get those traditional guys. But now that the men have been awoken to that now, the men are more picking more carefully. They're being more selective on the type of woman they picked. And then now those men are going to the internet. Now I'm not talking about the Fresh and the Fits. I'm not talking about the whatever podcast. Because the Fresh and the Fits, they're doing more damage than they're doing good. I'm talking about like the guys like the Angry Man, the guys like the Anton Daniels, the guys like a Medium Man. A lot of those brothers that took it to the internet that operate from a traditional standard and took a stance and say, no, this is how this is supposed to go with the women. This is how you men are supposed to operate. A, B, C, and D. Right? And for a time, it was waking up the men. The men were waking up. But like always in the past, or like always with our society, there's always other men that want to check other men on how they want to operate. So what you saw on the internet, and y'all, if you go on YouTube, you'll see it. You'll see men who are non-traditional, who have no intentions of contributing to the traditional norms that build society, telling traditional men that they're insecure because they won't accept a non-traditional woman. Or if this is like, say if I want monogamy and I'm more traditional, right? And I'm telling my women how to operate, I'm telling them how to function, because that's what a traditional man is. Traditional men of old, if you go look up any kingdom, you go look up the shogun warlords of feudal Japan, you go look up the medieval times, the men always instructed their constituents. If there was an issue going on in their castle or in their kingdom, those men would get up and call out the problem, and then call out that problem to be fixed. And if the problem wasn't going to be fixed, there was going to be consequences. That's how traditional men have always operated, even before the Victorian age. If there was a problem going on in that society, if there was something that was wrong, if there was a disturbance, that king would call out that disturbance in that community or that problem, and then go do something about it, right? So now, because the traditional men have taken to the internet and they have called out the bad behavior of the women, which they're supposed to be doing, traditional men have always checked the women and their bad behavior. And when the women would step out of line, the traditional men would come in and check them and put them back in their place. That's how a traditional man is supposed to operate, right? What you see on the internet is you see other men, which bothers me. Because as other men, if you're in a house that is being governed and built and maintained by traditional men, you have no right in their house to check those men on how they're supposed to operate. And because you don't want to live, if you don't want to contribute to the traditional norms that built the house, fine, cool, but do not disrespect the men in the house because you're trying to simp for the women. See, what happened is now you had a lot of men that were being non-traditional, that was engaging in hookup culture, and they were engaging into 304 mongering, which again, my personal position with that, right? If you're a man, right, and you say you don't want to be a traditional guy, you don't want to live up to traditionalism, you want to go out there and you want to smash and live your life, by all means, every man has a right to obligate himself to live his life the way he want to live it, and he is responsible for the outcomes, right? And he's responsible for getting the results he wants out of life. So if you want to be a non-traditional, you want to be non-monogamous, you want to be a player, a pimp, or mac, by all means, live your life. Because as a man, you're entitled to live your life the way you want to live it. The problem that I have now with that is, if you're in a house built by traditional men, maintained by traditional men, and where those traditional men contributed to the traditional norms that you and I benefit from today, don't disrespect the house. You may not agree with the house, but don't go against it or speak against it. So what happened was now traditional men got on the internet and started speaking and waking up the other men. And you had women in society that were living a 3 or 4 lifestyle, that were hookups, that were hot girl summer, hookup culture, whatever, that thought that were no longer getting access to a traditional man because that was the game of a lot of the women. A lot of the women were saying, okay, we're going to live this 3 or 4 lifestyle and then we're going to get a good guy at the end of the game, which is what you call shortcutting or cheating the game, right? What's shortcutting and cheating the game? It's like you're a white belt and you skip to a black belt without putting in the work to becoming a black belt. So you had a lot of women that were not putting in the work to being a traditional woman. They were putting the work to being a 3 or 4. And after they put the work into being a 3 or 4, they believed they deserved a traditional guy. And for a time, that's what they were getting, right? So what the men on the internet have done, the men who are non-traditional, is they have picked up the female shaming tactics. You're insecure, you're not a real man, etc., etc. And see, the thing was that the trick with that was not a trick. The thing was that is that only other men can tell other men what it is to be a man, right? So that's what's happening. So that's what you see going on the internet. You see a lot of non-traditional guys that are living a non-traditional lifestyle, programming the other men to be non-traditional to accept non-traditional women. Now that's important now, right? Because men, because the ability of masculinity is because we're the leaders of a society, we're the leaders of a community, meaning that wherever we go, the women follow. And not even just the women, it's just that we shape and mold the environment that we're in. That's the idea about being a provider, right? Where it's like when you saw Leonidas, or even in African cultures or Native American cultures, or even with Vikings, right? Where they send that boy off into the wilderness, and that was a ritual to take him away from his mother and transitioning him into being a man. Is to go out into the wilderness, figure it out, go hunt a animal, take that animal, transform that animal into either meat protein for food, take the skin, turn it into clothes, take the bones, turn it into weapons, so you can fend and provide for yourself, right? That's part of a man leadership, right? Because men, we do that today, right? We go outside to a house, we go work a job, we get the money, we take the money, and we turn that money energy into a house, we turn that money energy into clothes, we turn that money energy into a car. So that's one of men's ability, is to go out there and forge the environment into his likeness or his image. It's like how God and the Most High in the Bible said, we're going to forge man into our likeness or forge man into our image. That's what masculinity is. Men do, right? And how do you forge something into your image, right? So a man think it, so he becomes. And not only so does a man think it, so he becomes, he's going to shape his environment to match how he thinks. So traditional men, they're going to shape that environment into being more traditional if they're thinking traditional. It's like with Napoleon Hill's, my cats are meowing. Shut up. Be quiet. Stop fighting. Come here. Come here. I got 2 cats in here. One Siamese and one tuxedo. Come here. Come here. This is Panther right here. I can't get to the Siamese one because they're gonna fight. So the Siamese and Siamese are called Rogue. Him and Panther, they don't like each other. Every time they get close to each other, they scrap. But anyway, so if you're a traditional man, right, So remember, so a man thinketh, so he becomes. Right? You're going to forge your environment to match your thinking. Or you're going to forge your kingdom to match what you're thinking. Right? And it's like with Napoleon's Hill book, this 15 laws of success. He talks about something called the chief aim and finding like-minded people. Right? So now, if you have guys that are non-traditional, programming the men to be more non-traditional, by default, those men are going to lead the environment to being more non-traditional. And what's going to happen? See, a lot of the guys that engage into hookup culture and 304ism, they benefit from the women giving out free box everywhere, right? Now, again, I said I have no issue with those guys that like to engage in that stuff, that live your life, right? But you cannot have every man thinking like that, because what you're going to cause in society is what we have now, which is an imbalance, where you have the 304s overlapping the ladies, and you have the men who are non-traditional overlapping the traditional men. And what's going to happen is now that's going to remove the traditional foundation. It's going to collapse the house that's built off of traditionalism, right? So now when you have the men on YouTube who are non-traditional programming and socializing the men to accept 304s, guess what's going to become? What's the environment going to become? It's going to become a place for 304s. You see what I'm saying? It's going to become a place for 304s to thrive. And where we're going to what's going to happen is it's going to be Rome. It's going to be the Roman Empire again. And one of the reasons how the Roman Empire fell was because of the hedonism that went on during the Roman Empire. Right? So that is my biggest gripe, and that's why I titled this live with the power of traditional men and them being able to rule and define the house that they built and the kingdom that they built, right? Because as a traditional man, you have a right to set the rules and guidelines in your house, and you have a right and the ability to define how you want your women to operate and how you want other men to operate that agree with how you want to operate. Now, if you're a man and you don't agree with traditionalism, that's cool. But don't speak against the traditional house. Don't speak against those men. And stop trying to check those men how they want to operate. If they want to operate by checking women and telling women to be more traditional, you have no right to check those men and say those men cannot do that. Because a player or Mac, if you try to check a player or a Mac, he gonna tell you why you player hating. But the same player or Macs or non-traditional people run around the internet checking traditional men. And those traditional men should tell those players and Macs, yo, why you traditional man hating? All right? And one of the other things that I don't like about the non-traditional guys, right? They'll say allow a man to be free. I mean, they'll say allow a woman to be free to become what you want to become, right? But as soon as that woman, as soon as a traditional man comes up and he says, yo, women, be more traditional. Don't be so promiscuous. Be more virtuous with your box, right? And those women decide to follow those men, those traditional men. You see a lot of the non-traditional men get triggered by men telling women not to be promiscuous. And like I said, what has happened is that in the environment, a lot of men influence a lot of women to be promiscuous. There are men, I'm not going to say a lot, because I'm not sure of the ratio, but there are men in the dating market that influence the women to be more promiscuous and be more non-traditional. And then now, if you're a traditional guy and you're going into the dating market to find a traditional chick, and you're seeing that, wait a minute, why is this dating market filled with non-traditional women or 304s? As a traditional man, you have a right to step up and say something about it and say, yo, what's the problem with this? Right? And I think what has happened now is that because the women are saying, oh shit, the traditional men have found out the game. And the traditional men have said, okay, cool. You be who you want to be, but you're not gonna get access to me. You know what the women said? Okay, shit. Now we got to change up our game. We can't. We have to be. We can't be as promiscuous anymore. What happened was the other men who were non-traditional, who were engaging in 304 mongering and the hookup culture, they said, "Oh shit! If these men lead the women in the society to be more traditional, no more box for us." So that's why you see a lot of guys who are non-traditional getting up on the internet and shaming traditional guys, influencing women to be more traditional. As traditional men that rule and run the house, you're supposed to influence your women to be more traditional, right? And because it's your house, you can shame the men that don't live up to a traditional standard. Or you can shame the men that are being a disturbance in your house, right? Again, it's like the serpent in the garden, right? The serpent in the garden influenced Eve to rebel against Adam and God. And what did God do to the serpent? He punished the serpent and blocked them all out the garden. So as traditional men in your house, you have a right to shame the men that don't want to operate on traditionalism, and you have a right to shame the women that don't operate on traditionalism because it's your house. Now again, I wouldn't even be saying any of this if the men who are non-traditional wasn't trying to check traditional men for being traditional or disrespecting the men in their house. Right? The rules of masculinity is if you don't like how I'm operating in my house, leave my house and go build your own house and operate the way you want to operate. And what I get tired of is that people that don't want to live up and contribute to the traditional societal norms, saying, "Well, I don't want to go along with societal norms or traditional norms, or I don't believe in the traditional norms." Well, who gives a fuck what you think? Cool, you don't believe in the traditional norms, but don't speak against it. Don't disrespect other people that want to maintain those societal norms. Those same traditional societal norms is what kept America going. Is what keep us going. Like the fruits of the labor from those traditional men of old is why America is here today. Is why we benefit from electricity and air and a safe society that we're in today. You know what I'm saying? And one other thing I want to address, right? You have individualism versus group, or you have what's relative to me versus what's objective to everybody else, right? Now, see, the thing is, I agree with being an individual. I agree with you being yourself. But at the same time, I also agree with there having to be an objective standard for everybody to follow, right? Now, the common thing is that what they tell a lot of men is that, you got to focus on yourself and stop focusing on how the world operates, which is true to an extent. It's true to a level. Because one thing is that as a man, you're responsible for your own actions. You're responsible for your own results. You're responsible for creating the outcomes you want out of life. And a lot of times you have to focus on your own thoughts and manifestations to bring those, how you want to live your life, to reality. You can't allow other people or society or how other people want to run their life dictate how you want to run your life. So that's why you must focus on yourself to an extent. The thing is now, when the environment you live in is no longer, how you say, conducive to your brand of masculinity, or it can no longer cultivate the way you want to live your life, what do you do then after that? You can no longer focus on yourself because the environment is not. It's just like soil not being able to cultivate watermelon. Like watermelon can only grow in the summertime. So if for the watermelon, if the environment is not the type of environment for watermelon to grow, that watermelon is not going to grow. It's not going to rise. It's like with coconuts, right? Coconut, there has to be a certain condition for a coconut to grow, right? So the coconut can focus on itself and making sure it grows. But if that environment is not proper for that coconut to grow, guess what? It's not going to grow. So that's the issue I have with as an individualism, right? Because you can focus on yourself as an individual until the environment can no longer cultivate your individualism, right? The reason why we can be individuals now is because the environment that we have can cultivate that. But if that environment collapses, you can't cultivate yourself as an individual now, right? So at the same time, as men, you have to focus on yourself. You still have to focus on contributing to the group. So you can focus on yourself as a traditional man, but you got to find other men that want to be traditional too, and other women that want to be traditional too. So you can mold the environment into being traditionalism, so that you could cultivate your children's children to be in traditionalism. So that there's a place for your traditional masculinity to grow. If the environment that we have is non-traditional, the environment that we have is what you call a more hedonist culture, you cannot grow traditionalism in a habitat or a environment that doesn't support traditional masculinity, right? And every time traditional men try to mold that environment to be more traditional, other men who are non-traditional go against it. In a house built off of traditionalism, in a garden built by traditionalism, which is funny to me. You know what I'm saying? This is why when you go on YouTube, you see other non-traditional men checking other men on how they're supposed to operate. Telling men that, you shouldn't be complaining about women, or you can't complain about 304s. Well, you know what the men that can't complain about 304s is? The men that engage with 304s. The men that are out there in hookup culture. The men that are out there who are players and max and into non-monogamy. See, a man that's into non-monogamy or into open relationship, they can't complain about 304s because that's what they're engaging in. That's the environment they're engaging in. That's the environment that they created for themselves. So they can't really complain about that. Traditional men who want to be traditional, who is looking into the environment and saying, hold on, why is this environment that I just built up to be traditional, why is there 304s here? Where did this 304 plant come from? Or this crop of 304s come from? Where did they come from? And that traditional man has a right to go weed those things up by complaining about the problem, by checking that, and then what you call planting more traditional seeds to mold the environment to be more traditional. But like I said, every time the traditional men get up on the internet to go speak on it and but because one way a man can mold his environment or influence his environment is like how I'm doing this with y'all on YouTube, speaking and talking, right? Because remember, so a man thinks, so he becomes, right? And a lot of times men speak what they think, right? And they can mold what they think. They can mold the environment how they think by speaking into the environment or speaking into the universe. You call that auto-suggestion, or you call that manifestation, or whatever you want to call that, right? So every time the men try to mold the women into being more traditional and mold the environment to be more conducive for traditionalism, other men come to disrupt it. That's what you see on YouTube. That's why you see 304. That's what I disagree with Fresh and Fit when they have 304s on there, because they're molding the environment to adapt to 304s. Right? It's one thing if Fresh and Fit was talking about the women you shouldn't deal with and showing you the example. And then in the next breath, they bring women on there that are more traditional or tell you that this is the type of woman you should be getting. But Fresh and Fit are not doing that. Even the players on the max you see on YouTube, right? Those guys on YouTube, because they're engaging in the 304 mongering and they're engaging in sex culture, they're conditioning the men to accept those women from that culture, and they're conditioning the environment to accept that. And then when a traditional man complains about the environment, those men that are engaging in sex culture tell those men to stop complaining. Well, I wouldn't complain if you wasn't fucking up my environment. For the men that are engaging in sex culture, for the men that are engaging in non-traditionalism and non-monogamy, you're fucking up the house of tradition. You're fucking up the garden of tradition. You're like the serpent in the garden. And you're disrupting the traditional culture that we have. Right? If you weren't disrespecting me, or the men in society that want to be traditional, I'd have nothing to say to you. Or those traditional men would have nothing to say to you. Right? But that's what you see going on in our society today. Where you see traditional men try to fix the house, especially in the black community. And you have non-traditional men that have been benefiting from the 304 culture in the black culture. And a lot of hedonism that's been going on in the black culture. Now that they see that they're more traditional men trying to change the environment into being more traditional, the non-traditional men are going against it. Because I believe they feel like they're going to lose the benefit of box if there's no more sex culture and the women become more traditional. Well, if that happens, that's what's supposed to happen. Why is that? Because again, you're in a traditional house built by traditional men. So if the traditional men want to dictate where the fuck the house goes, they're allowed to do that. And if the non-traditional men don't benefit from that, oh the fuck well. Move somewhere else. Go somewhere else and create a non-traditional society where you could do that. Like you have a state in New Orleans, I think, where it's like a swinger state. Go to New Orleans, where it's a swinger state. I think it's either New Orleans or Ohio. Go to one of those two states where you can engage in sex culture and be over there. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, that was what was on my chest. It was something that was swimming around in my brain that I had to speak on. Yeah, but traditional men have a right to determine their house. And traditional men have a right to shame the women and shame the men that are in their house that don't want to be traditional and at the same time disrespecting those traditional men. Or trying to check traditional men in their own house. Right? But anyway, this is Kiss Shawty Gaming Nation. Click the like, share, donate, support the channel. And I'm out.